Welcome in, everybody. Grind Time, powered by Full Time Fantasy in the FFWC. My name is Billy Muzio. I am your host. Today with me, a special guest, Jim Coventry. He's an analyst over at RotoWire. He's also a host on Sirius XM Radio and last year's 2021 Kings Classic champion. Welcome to the podcast, Jim. Always nice to talk football with you. I'm happy to have you on, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Feeling the same way. Excited it's week 14, and let's get at it, right?
Oh, yeah, week 14, we have the bye-mageddon. We have a lot of teams on byes this week. In the fantasy playoffs for some high stakes as well, so that's going to be throwing a monkey wrench in people's plans. You have a lot of people who are looking for a must-win to get into the playoffs as well, so there's a lot of crucial lineup decisions that are going to be going into week 14 fantasy rosters, and we are here to try to help sort those out. Let's just dive right in. I want to talk about the first running back who has kind of been maybe a headache for fantasy managers this season. Not necessarily the player that we imagined drafting when we took him in round 1 in some drafts, maybe round 2 if you were lucky, and possibly got him in round 3 in maybe a home league, but that player's name is DeAndre Swift. This week he comes in as my running back 11. He is your running back 17. ECR is right between us, expert consensus ranking at running back 15. Why don't you walk me through your ranking of Swift? Or it looks like you don't fully trust him yet. Walk me through that process.
So basically, he was on this bender where it was 30% of the snaps like every week. And last week, at least, I was very happy. 51% of the snaps, that was better. Jamal Lewis scaled back down to 30. That was very nice. So I'm cautiously optimistic. And his touches went from 8 to 9, and then we had the 18 last week. But, man, it is kind of tough to know if we're going to trust Dan Campbell here. Now, remember, we saw this matchup with Swift in week 3, and Swift did play a full snap share in that with 31 snaps, which has been his snap share, for much of the season. And he had 7 carries, 31 yards, caught a few passes like 15 yards. It was his worst PPR game of the year. And that Minnesota matchup, Minnesota's kind of been death against the run this year for teams. Very tough to move on. Their linebackers are really active. They give up catches, and that's where the silver lining, why I have Swift at least in a good spot here. We know that Zonovan Knight and Ty Johnson, 11 catches, only 6 yards a catch, but there were plenty of catches. Ramondre, 9 catches, about 75, 76 yards. And then, of course, Tony Pollard went nuclear. So that's at least been favorable. But typically, Minnesota's a tougher matchup. And then we know Zonovan Knight had that 90-yard game. That was atypical. They had no other running back all year hit 80 on them. So Swift is going to need to be at the high end of his touches to go off. So I have a little bit of hesitation banked in because a few things need to break his way, Billy, to get to where I'd like him to be.
Yeah, it is a tough matchup on the ground. They've given up the 5th fewest rushing yards on the season, 919 to be exact. But you hit the hammer on the nail. They're beatable through the air with the running backs. They've actually given up the 3rd most receiving yards for running back position, 565, only behind the Raiders and the Jacksonville Jaguars, who we got to see last night, at least one of those teams last night. The thing with Swift, though, is we did see his snap count increase, like you mentioned, 51.3% of the snaps last week, where 30.3 of that was Jamal. That was the first time since week 2 that he outsnapped Jamal Williams. So I understand the hesitation or maybe the lack of trust with DeAndre Swift. It appears, though, that either he gave up the pictures that he had of Deuce Staley and his family, or he is fully healthy and he's ready to rock and roll, because he, 51% of the snaps was the second highest of the season outside week 1. He ran 48.8% of the routes, which was, top 3 this year for him in his route participation. I think we might have for maybe the second time all season outside week 1 a healthy DeAndre Swift. And I don't necessarily like the matchup on the ground, but we all know that DeAndre Swift is one of the most capable pass-catching backs in the NFL and arguably one of the best PPR assets for a running back. And if he's going to be making his money, that's where it's going to be done, and through the air, especially against this Minnesota defense who gives up the 3rd most to running back position in the air.
Yeah, we're on the same page for the most part. Our rankings are a little bit apart. I think running back 17 is, like I said, I have a little bit of hesitation, but it's not enough. I mean, clearly a strong start this week.
Yeah, very strong start. Next running back, another strong start for, and we're talking about some strong starts here, but there's been a lot of question marks surrounding a lot of these backs, and why I want to be talking about them. But is the next one's Ezekiel Elliott. So comes in my running back 10 for week 14, your running back 15. ECR again down the middle for us, ECR 13. So again, splitting the differences here. Zeke has been pretty heavily involved again since he got back from that knee injury. He kind of averaging his 15 to 17, carries on the ground, his 1 to 3 targets a game now. Last week finished as the running back 9 in PPR. The week prior to that, 15. The week prior to that, he was running back 10. So we have now had 3 straight weeks of running back 15 or better. He does get the Houston Texans this week, who are just atrocious versus the running back position. I think, Swiss cheese has less holes in it than this Houston Texans run defense, who are giving up 28.69 fantasy points a game to the running back position. They have just been getting absolutely annihilated on the ground. Walk me through Zeke. Again, another strong start, but slightly lower than ECR. Just want to hear your reasoning.
The reasoning is going to start with this. Agreed on Houston, but lately they're weird. It's like they're ganging up on the middle of the field because Nick Chubb, 17 carries, he only hit 80 yards. Jeff Wilson, he missed about a quarter of that game, but 13 carries, 39 yards. He was going 6.5 yards a pop going into that game. I had him as my running back 3 that week. Totally blew it. Brian Robinson, he is what he is, but he went 15 carries for 57 yards. But the backups, the guys that got to the perimeter in those games, well, 2 of them for sure, they're the guys that really went off. Kareem Hunt only had 9 carries, but he was like almost 6.5 yards a carry, 56 yards. Antonio Gibson outdid Brian Robinson, 72 yards on his 18 carries. What I'm noticing lately, the recent trend with Houston, like I just kind of said earlier, I think they're making a little more of an effort to kind of group people inside, but they're getting gashed by the secondary guys. And to me, Zeke's going to do his damage, right? But Tony Pollard, that's the guy in DFS I like this week. And we're not going to talk about him for long because that's not our point. But I think that we're seeing a recent trend that we can pick on. But you're right about Zeke. My gosh, between 15.5 and 18 PPR points in his last 5 games. That is insane production. And he even had limited snaps in some of those games. And that last week, it was nice to see, though. I think last week was the first time in a while he's been back to 100% because he went back to that 56% snap share. Pollard went to 41. Zeke had a little bit of a 5-carry edge. They both had 3 targets. But that's the only hesitation I see. We know Houston's bad against the run. It's just been a recent trend. I still have Zeke as my running back 15. And like I said, I think Pollard's one that goes nuclear here.
Yeah, Pollard is a good bet to score pretty much anywhere on the field where we know we need that short yardage or the goal line from Zeke. He just doesn't have the speed that he once had in his career. We see them leaning early and often now on Pollard. We're seeing now more of that 1-2 tandem punch, where before it was more that 65-30 split, and now we're seeing a little bit more closer to 50-50. So again, another strong start from Zeke. Gotta like the matchup heading into the fantasy playoffs. And for those of you who do play high stakes, you're maybe in the playoffs or championship match at one site this week, and I think a pretty strong start there for him. Donta Foreman was actually removed from the injury report today, which was a bit of a surprise for me, and is expected to make his start this week versus Seattle. And Seattle also very beatable on the ground. They give up the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back position, 27.73 fantasy points per game. They have given up 11 rushing touchdowns and on the ground, 3 in the air, and a combined about 1,800 yards total to the running back position through the season. Donta Foreman, though, seems to be pretty game script dependent, right? If they do get behind, we've seen this offense who has completely just hyper-focused either Blackshear and or Chuba Hubbard, where they combined for 18% target share the previous week. What is your take on Donta Foreman this week? We expect Carolina to play from behind because they always play from behind. But do you expect them to lean on the run maybe and try to limit the time in which Seattle has the ball in their hand, try to control this game on the ground? What's your take with Donta Foreman this week, and how do you think the game's played out?
Yeah, I think Seattle's one of those teams. They're not really blowing anybody out. I think that Carolina's able to keep this one close. And Foreman's been pretty predictable this season. I mean, the one game they had, the Cincinnati game, where that game they were down, 30 points at halftime. So he got game scripted out. And that one was an oddity. And actually, the week he played Baltimore, I told people to sit him. He wasn't going anywhere against Baltimore. Since they got Roquan Smith, that he's done so much better there than in Chicago. And I'm not talking IDP. You pile up your tackles, fine. But he has been a stylistic fit there, allowing other players latitude to do other things. So those are the games that Foreman, like I said, Baltimore sit him. But in his other 4 games, so 4 of his 6 starts, he's been between 113 and 130 yards. He is consistently getting it done. Now, not many targets. I think he has a total of 8 targets over those games. So he gets a couple a game, and that's it. But we're looking at rushing production here. And like you said, this is a Seattle defense you totally could take advantage of on the ground. Cam Akers went for 60 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, right there, that's the beginning. Obviously, Josh Jacobs saw the carnage that he did, over 200 yards and 2 scores with an overtime. Rashad White went over 100 yards. Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Cordero Patterson all went over 100 yards. It's very easy to run on this defense. And I do believe, I know he splits some work, but for the most part, they lean on him. And again, when you're 4 out of 6 games over 113 yards, to me, that's pretty good consistency, especially if we could rule out one of those games as one we wouldn't have expected anything from. This is a green light game all the way for him.
Love the analysis there. I think definitely they're probably going to lean on him. I did not expect him to be off the injury report, so I'm going to be adjusting him in my ranks. He came in preliminary rankings. I haven't adjusted with the news today, but he was my running back 23. You're running back 14. ECR was 20. We probably expect that to climb now that he's removed from the injury report. He'll probably settle somewhere between 16 and 18 for me. Not quite as high as 14, but now we're both within the ballpark. Next running back we'll talk about is James Cook. James Cook's been coming on hot as of late, so he's had some up and downs, especially in PPR leagues where last week he finished as running back 13, the week prior to that 56, the week prior to that 29, so he has had some hills and valleys. It was promising to see him, though, see 42.7% of the snaps last week compared to Devin Singletary, saw 44%. James Cook comes in as my running back 26 this week. I'm a little more bullish than you are. You have met running back 38. ECR is at 28. So again, splitting our numbers here. Walk me through your process with James Cook. Do you expect him to start getting more involved? And then kind of a bonus question on top of it. Why the hell would they trade for Nyheim Hines if they weren't going to use him?
Kick returning. Maybe. No, just a joke there. But he does return kicks. I will give him that. Oh, no, funny enough. So with James Cook, I still don't trust the usage. I mean, we've had carries 11, 2, and 14. We don't know what we're getting. Targets, 2, 0, 5. There's no rhyme or reason. The snap share could have been for any reason last week. He had a 25%, an 18, and then, like you said, a 43 last week. I haven't seen enough to make me believe he is a thing there. But here's the thing. They played the Jets just about 5 weeks ago. The Jets smashed their running game. Now, the Bills can't run block to save their lives. Per Pro Football Focus, they're a bottom 5 run blocking unit, while the Jets are a top 6 run defense. And I think they're getting better as we're going on. Now, in that Week 9 game against the Bills, Cook had 4 carries, 15 yards, fine. Singletary, 8 carries for 24 yards. I see this rematch, though. The Jets are going to be even tougher on the Bills, and the Bills are going to be tougher on the Jets. This is going to be that classic divisional rematch, super low-scoring game. It's going to be a slugfest. Certainly, it'll be cold. I haven't looked at the weather enough yet, but it's certainly going to be a East Coast North game, so it's going to be cold nonetheless. This is going to be a very low-volume game. And at the end of the day, the one carrying the freight on the ground is probably going to be Josh Allen to a degree. But this is a battle of 2 really strong defense. The Bills, healthy enough. Milano looks like he's going to play for them. But back to what we're talking about, this is just a nightmarish matchup for the entire Buffalo offense, but really the running game.
Yeah, it is tough to trust the usage. I feel like they are getting him more involved, at least a little bit more consistently. It's not to a point where we can say that we can count on it. But in a week where we have the Bears, the Colts, the Commanders, the Falcons, the Packers, the Saints, 6 teams on bye, it definitely changes the landscape of the top 30, and it's easier for a back for me like James Cook, who maybe gets a few more targets this week to kind of sneak his way into that top 30. But you did hit the hammer on the nail. The Jets have been playing tough, not only against the run, but also in the air. They just have a good defense all the way around. That being said, I do expect the Bills to get ahead. I do expect them to take a lead, and I do expect them to lean a little bit more on the running game this week, hence why I have James Cook where I have him. I want to talk about Cam Akers, and I know the game already happened, but I just want to talk to it because I feel like either one, McVay hates fantasy football, or two, he doesn't know. He's like a strange Dex who doesn't know what she wants, right? He doesn't know if she wants Cam Akers. Does she want, Kyren Williams? We saw 70% of snaps from Kyren week 12. We saw 70% from Cam Akers week 13. And then we have last night where we saw Cam Akers come in with 70% again. So it's been kind of a flip and a flop between these snap counts between the two of them. I can't make any rhyme or reason to it outside the 2 touchdown performance from Cam Akers. Can you make heads or tails of the situation, or are you just avoiding it now?
Oddly enough, Akers has been about 4 yards a carry before, like 3 games going into yesterday, and he wasn't far off of that. So, the yards per carry, he's not good or anything, but he's getting that. Now, it was game script last night, right? Did anybody think for a minute that game would be competitive? We have Josh McDaniels coaching not to lose. He made no attempt. They're stacking the box to stop Jacobs, and they're having success. And all he has to do is throw the ball a little bit, and he refused to do it. So that allowed Akers a great game script to at least get 12 carries, right? Kyren Williams, I imagined, would have been involved, but there was no need to bring him in because the game script was always, they were in it the whole way. They were never down. They were down 13 at one point. That's certainly, we saw that was not insurmountable. So I think really that's the way it went. And the Rams haven't been getting blown out as much as I thought they would be. And I think that's really all it is. I think he's trusted Akers as their early down back. And Kyren Williams is small. I love him. He has a ton of explosive ability. But I think ultimately, if they want to keep their game plan on script, Akers is the only one capable of that role. And it was trash to see Malcolm Brown back on the roster and on the field. Thanks.
Yeah, when I saw Malcolm Brown, I'm like, oh yeah, here we go again, right?
Yes.
I was expecting him to be on the field more because why not? It's McVay. But they continued the hot hand approach with Akers, if you can call it hot hand, but they continued the approach with Akers, I should say. And we'll see what they continue to do next week. I'm a little disappointed though because I liked Kyren Williams. I think he has the skill set to succeed. It's just looking like it might be more of a 2023 play now moving forward. Let's talk about our starts of the week. And this is a player that we are both higher on, or we're each going to give a player that we're both higher on compared to ECR, expert consensus rankings. For me, running back this week is going to be Travis Homer, as he comes in as my running back 36. ECR is running back 48. Love the matchup this week. Love the fact that we are possibly, that he's going to possibly be the lead back in this offense. He makes his money as well on the ground as through the air as well, so he's involved in the passing game. Week 12, he saw a 20% route rate, 3 targets, 2 receptions. He had the ability to take it to the house at 53 yards total and a touchdown. Not expecting a lot out of him, but again, we have a reduced slate with all the bye weeks. Running back 36 is definitely within the realm of possibilities, and I think there's actually a decent chance that he outperforms this ranking as well, especially given the chances of a touchdown. What do you think, Jim?
Oh, 100%. And in some of these deeper leagues that I'm in where there's nothing at all, it was on a couple of waiver wires, and I was very happy to pick him up. And I probably will be in a situation come Sunday morning that I'll certainly have him in my lineup. And so I am expecting decent things. He's a good receiver too. So if they decide to throw the screen game, really that's where he's best. Mm-hmm. But he probably is a 3-down back the way it's looking right now. So I absolutely love that call. He's going to be a phenomenal play. I'll give you mine. Mine's Mike Boone. Now I put him at running back 48. I could potentially put him a little higher, but I'm good with that right now because everybody's sleeping on Boone. I think I'm probably too much of an apologist for him, all full disclosure. But Latavius Murray. So against Carolina 2 weeks ago, there was a play where there was a defensive breakdown. The whole side of the field was open. Nobody covered there. So he runs 52 yards. And I know we don't like to take one run out, but this is an explosive. He's not an explosive guy with 52-yard runs. He's basically been less than 3 yards a carry for the last month. And so it was about 2.8. That one run saved him. But he is moving anywhere. Mike Boone was starting to get into the mix. Gordon was still there. And, of course, first game, high ankle sprain. So he was done. Now, I realized last week I thought Boone would be more involved when they activated him. But then we get a report from Zach Stevens, and how reliable the site, the DNVR.com, Denver.com. Well, they're saying that the offensive coordinator of the Broncos says he absolutely envisions Boone with a larger role this week. And it would make sense if it was a week ramping him up. And now we're going to hopefully put Latavius Murray, at least cut down his work significantly. I could easily see them, if Boone gets going. And against the Chiefs, they may not stop running, even if they fall behind. I don't think they want Russell Wilson dropping back all day. They may be down 20 points, say, you know what, we'll still screen and we'll still run because passing the ball, no Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy's banged up. Wilson is what Wilson is right now. So I think this is overall, it's a decent situation. Boone could get you conservatively 40 yards, 3 catches, and he might do better than that.
I love the play. I actually have him as running back 46 right now, so I'm also with you in that same range. Again, he could also outperform it, I think. Kansas City defense gives up the 20th worst defense versus the running back position, and I agree with you. I mean, it's a clear and obvious Russ can't cook. He needs to go back to culinary school, and we have the running backs who are going to be probably leading the core here. You mentioned it too. No Cortland Sutton. Dulcich, though, has been a very good tight end, underutilized up until last week, and I think this is probably the week we see him break out as well. That's just a little sneak peek in my tight end preview rankings there. Moving on to wide receiver, Garrett Wilson is the first one I want to talk about. Jets wide receiver. I have wide receiver 16. You're 19. ECR is 18. Again, splitting the difference here. And Garrett Wilson has been phenomenal. 91.6% of snaps last week. He saw an 89.8% of route rate in week 13 as well. The emergence of the quarterback swap has been phenomenal for Garrett Wilson, where he's finished now as wide receiver number 9 in week 13 and wide receiver number 5 in week 12. What do you think about Garrett Wilson and his new quarterback, Mike White?
So obviously Garrett Wilson is already a superstar in this league. There's no debate. Nobody's going to debate that, and certainly I'm not going to. In this particular game, I always defer to the second divisional matchups. Sean McDermott, the head coach of Buffalo, defensive-minded coach, certainly saw when Garrett Wilson went off for them in the first meeting, 8 catches, 92 yards. That was with Zach Wilson, of course. But nonetheless, Garrett Wilson won't be catching the Bills by surprise here. And I don't think they're worried about Corey Davis. Elijah Moore doesn't play enough snaps to worry anybody. He needs to. That's another story for another day. But no, exactly. So Garrett Wilson won't catch them by surprise. And sometimes that's the deal. Remember what Jamar Chase last year in the teams against the teams he saw a second time. That second time after he went off the first time, the numbers were very suppressed. Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, the numbers went down significantly at second meeting. Not that Garrett Wilson went for 200 yards. He didn't. But again, the Bills are a very well-coached zone defense, but they will have a priority on Wilson. He's still going to have a good game. I mean, look, he's had 92-plus yards in 4 out of 5 games. And the one game he didn't was the rematch against Belichick, right? When Zach Wilson went from 350 yards to 77, something like that. But you saw the defensive correction made there. So anyway, though, and remember, Garrett Wilson, as great as he is, his 2 recent games with Mike White, and this speaks more to Mike White than Garrett Wilson. It was against the Bears, who can't cover. They were down 3 defensive backs by the end of that game, and they can't rush. And then Minnesota, who can't cover either. They're getting worse in coverage by the week, although they can get some pressure. So Mike White has had a really nice schedule to move in. Wilson's still fine. I mean, ranking him 19, certainly no disrespect there. I mean, recent receivers against Buffalo have done really well. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 122 and a touchdown. Amari Cooper scored twice, 113. And, of course, Jefferson, 193 and a touchdown. But, again, second meeting. That's my main point.
So you mentioned Minnesota and how bad they've been, which tees up the next player. Amon-Ra St. Brown comes in as my wide receiver 5 this week. Your 9, ECR 6. Amon-Ra does get Minnesota. They have been horrible. There's the second worst defense versus wide receiver positions fantasy purposes, giving up 39.61 fantasy points per game. They're only behind the Tennessee Titans, who don't have a secondary. And so Amon-Ra, a beast last week. We all know what he did. He possibly could have had another touchdown. He still had 2 on the day. He finished as wide receiver number 2. He saw 87.8% of snaps, 93% of the route rate, 12 targets, 4 of those which were in the red zone, which was nice to see, and 114 total receiving yards. I love Amon-Ra St. Brown this week. Love the matchup. But when everything's said and done, he may actually sneak his way into the top 3 for me. Very bullish on him this week just because of the matchup and what they have left at the wide receiver core.
I'm an X's and O's guy. You think you know that from our talks in the offseason. So the one thing I see with Minnesota, cornerbacks are awful. Dantzler may or may not be back. They put him on the IR window to return. Don't know. We'll know by 4 o'clock on Saturday. But I don't know that matters here. St. Brown's a slot, right? Well, the one thing Minnesota does well within their zone, they're linebackers. You think slot corner when you think St. Brown right away. But the way they play their zone, they are really, really good at passing off assignments in the middle of the field. And they're very fast to react. St. Brown did well against them in week 3, 6 catches for 73 yards on 9 targets. But it wasn't his typical game. And I attested a lot of that to that linebacker play because they work in conjunction with their slot corners against the type of player that St. Brown is. Now, they'll be versatile with St. Brown on occasion, and the more versatile they choose to be, that elevates his upside. So if they get him out of the middle of the field more, which they are inclined to do that on occasion, and if they pull out that bag of tricks here, I could see a huge game for him. Just those things make me a little concerned. Still have him wide receiver 9, so he's still going to have a big game here. I just think that if they keep him to his traditional role, I think it lowers the chance of the eruption game.
Yeah, I think that was when he first kind of saw the beginning of his nagging injury was that week 3.
It's true.
72.4% of the snaps that week. Teetered off dramatically the following week he was out, and then week 5 he came back and only saw 29.7. I think that was the concussion game. So I think that was partly due to injury, but I agree they do kind of swap off coverage, a lot more, which in my opinion could create some more mismatches as well, just because Amon-Ra St. Brown is a freak athlete. But it'll be interesting to see how they utilize him. His snap counts have been pretty consistently at 88% or higher. His route rate over 93% last week was the second highest of the season. Nice to see the usage. Loved the matchup. And excited to see what they do with him this week. Next receiver is Christian Kirk, wide receiver 15 for me, wide receiver 23 for you. ECR comes in as wide receiver 15. Walk me through the thought process for Christian Kirk.
So I am a little lower on him, and maybe I shouldn't be. The main apprehension is I am a little worried about Trevor Lawrence. I thought it was the knee, and now we're hearing it's the toe. Regardless, we're talking the mechanics of a quarterback that really needs the mechanics. So I'm a little bit concerned here. And I don't even know that he's a full green light to go. It sounds like he's going to play, but could there be a setback? And the other thing I'm thinking about here, we know how bad the cornerback play in Tennessee is. But now we've seen games where Lawrence has gone to Kirk because Kirk has been the advantage. The other outside receivers weren't an advantage. This might actually be a game where Marvin and Zay Jones have an advantage on the outside. And those are rare because normally they're the guys that are having to scrap. So this could be a game, if Lawrence is okay to throw, that it's like, you know what? I can throw outside. I don't just have to pound the middle 12 times a Christian Kirk. And that's the only apprehension I have. And again, the injury to Lawrence. And this also could be one of those games, again, lower scoring game. Tennessee is like to drag the game into the mud. Now, Jacksonville slows down Derrick Henry as he's been slowed in the last few weeks. That could change the script a little bit. Otherwise, I probably am a little bit lower on Kirk than I should be, but those things do give me a little bit of reason for pause.
Yeah, I think you're baking in more of the injury than I am. I'm going to wait until the wire and see if he's in or out. If he's out, I think I'm even lower than you in the ranking, because I just don't trust backup quarterbacks very often in the NFL. That being said, Tennessee Titans are literally the worst secondary and give it the most fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They're much better against the run, so they would have to get it done through the air. They've given up 248 fantasy points to slot receivers here throughout the season. So I'm hoping that Lawrence is able to go. At least my fantasy teams are. I have several with Lawrence on them and with Kirk. So I would like to see that, especially with the juicy matchup. Let's see what the injury reports say coming down through the weekend. Deebo Samuel, next wide receiver we wanted to discuss. Wide receiver 24 for me this week. Wide receiver 22 for you. We're splitting hairs here. We're both lower than ECR. ECR is wide receiver 20. I know why I'm lower. I'll get to my reasonings next, but walk me through your thought process with Deebo for week 14.
So he's still dealing with the quad issue a bit. In the last 2 games, his production's been a little muted. 3 catches, 43, 658. It's fine production. It's nothing outrageous. And now, of course, we have the offense going to be compressed a little bit more. Not that Jimmy Garoppolo was scaring anybody, but Brock Purdy certainly is a downgrade from Jimmy. And, Deebo hasn't had a ceiling this year. He only has 2 games over 16 PPR points. His biggest game was 23-7. Last year, he was over 29 times, 3 of those over 30. But he does get 6 to 10 targets a game, so there's that. And what still for the saving grace for him is that where he lines up, he'll avoid Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean, the 2 outside corners from Tampa, a lot because we know they get him into space very quickly. So that's certainly useful. But it just does, and I also think chemistry could be an issue here because with Brock Purdy, a lot of the stuff that Deebo Samuel does is very, very timing based. And that timing it's not as easy as it sounds, right? The ball has to be put in the optimal position because the point of Shanahan's offense is you lead the receiver to get run after the catch yardage. But if that ball is just a slight bit behind him, it's still a completed pass. But now instead of 7 yards after the catch, we have 2. So I'm still okay on him, but I am a little lower than consensus because I'm a bit concerned about how that chemistry works out. And again, the slight nagging injury he's dealing with.
Yeah, I'm same exact reasons. My only fear, every time I move him this low, there's that piece in the back of my head that says, how much are they going to use him on the ground? Right. And now we have no Elijah Mitchell. I didn't expect him to be fully entrenched last week on the ground game because of the injury. But he's another weekend. He's had some time to heal. There was no setbacks, at least that we know about. Do you think they get him more involved this week on the ground game? Do you think they're going to go 88% Christian McCaffrey again? Or do you think they want to lighten that workload maybe a tidbit and get Deebo Samuel involved?
Billy, I don't think they can afford to run Deebo Samuel. I mean, he's still limited on the injury report, right? Mm-hmm. But he has 2 to 4 rushes in each of the last 4 games, and his rushing numbers have been lower this year. We knew it was a point of contention with him in the offseason with the contract. The reason that, they gave him the extension so they worked things out. But he didn't like the idea of the types of hits you're taking as a runner. Well, look, Brock Purdy's our quarterback, but they still are a team that has to believe they can compete for a Super Bowl, and they can't get Deebo hurt. Running him between the tackles, if they don't have to, if it's a game where you're trying to make a comeback, or if it's a game that if you have to win for seeding in the playoffs, then maybe you're looking at that specific game a little differently. I don't think they have the luxury to expose him to extra hits. They need to figure out who they can run between the tackles. If it's Jordan Mason, whoever to kill some of those grinder carries, because we got to keep McCaffrey and Deebo at full health, Billy.
I like that sentiment. I just hope the Niners are smart enough to go that route. You never know with Kyle Shanahan and this offense. And our strength and conditioning coach, Dustin Perry, has been on my chopping block for a couple of years. Has not reached the chopping block for the Niners quite yet, but it seems like we always have the injuries that seem to derail our campaign year after year. But I agree. I think Purdy is a downgrade in the offense, although he did look pretty good last week.
Man.
I think he's able to move the ball down the field in this offense, and I think that the screen game is going to help him. And I think that, of course, having Christian McCaffrey back there is going to help any inexperienced quarterback. So that's a benefit as well. I'm excited to see what he's able to do with this offense, but not a great matchup for his first week coming in as the full starter in a preparation week against Tampa Bay. I loved his quote was that Tom Brady's been playing football longer than I've been alive in the NFL at that.
That's insane. It's true, and it's insane.
Yeah. So I thought that was a great little quote from him, and I'm looking forward to seeing history be made tonight, or this weekend, I should say. Last receiver I want to talk about on the list before we hop into our sleeper picks for wide receiver is Keenan Allen. Both of us have him as wide receiver 12 on the button. ECR is wide receiver 14. We're both a little higher than ECR. Walk me through Keenan Allen.
In this matchup, obviously it's a must-win at this point. Their season is pretty much over, but it's not. I mean, if they win this game, they're obviously their playoff odds are better than if they lose, which would be down to couple percent. But Allen's, we've seen good snap shares last 3 weeks. He went up to 96% last week. So now he is back to being full-fledged in the offense where we needed him. And his last 3 games, he had 5 catches, and he went up to 5 again, then 6 last week. Finally hit the end zone twice in a row. So he's getting there. Now, we don't like that he's caught 16 of 32 targets since coming back, half of his targets, and he's a slot guy. That's like an unacceptable rate. But now we have the issue of Miami. Miami is really, really struggling to cover, and we know Miami will get pressure, but that leads to Allen being really productive. When the pressure's coming, the third week, full week back for Allen, now number 4, he's going to be a little more crisp on those routes, and we know that Herbert is going to have to get him the ball out of default, and there will be space. This is not a tight zone to worry about. If they decide to place a man, that's a big benefit to Allen. There's no lose scenario for him here, and certainly they're going to have to score points in this game because the way the Chargers defense is banged up, they're giving up points here. So Allen does have a good chance to go over 100 yards and score yet again.
Yeah, Miami, very bad versus slot receivers. They've given up 215 points for slot receivers versus 158 out wide, so a little tougher of a matchup for Palmer this week than it is for Keenan Allen. It was nice to see Keenan Allen get fully back, kind of entrenched in the snap count as well. 95.8% of snaps, the highest of the season. He saw 88.5% route rate, also highest of the season. 14 targets, also highest of the season. 1 in the red zone. So it looks like he is finally past that hamstring injury, and he's healthy and he's here to play. So love the matchup. Love the potential shootout as well, and I think that we have a pretty big week from Keenan Allen. My sleeper wide receiver of the week this week is wide receiver Kendall Hinton. So he comes in as wide receiver number 47. You have him as wide receiver 65. ECR is closer to where you have him as wide receiver 63. I think we have no Courtland Sutton, so I think his ECR is going to adjust. I was kind of banking on the fact that Courtland Sutton was going to be out. And we have seen Kendall Hinton's snap share be pretty sufficient. So I'm going to go back to week 10 just for kind of a big picture overview for folks. 97.2% snap shares in week 10, 87.1 in week 11, 89.5 week 12, 88.8 last week. He saw 79.2% route rate last week, 94.7 in week 12, 85.3 in week 11, 93.8 in week 10. No Sutton this week. They're probably going to be playing from behind here versus the Chiefs. I'm expecting him to be closer to that 90% snap share, probably closer to that 85 to 90% route rate as well out of necessity. Although I do think that they're going to use Dulcich out wide a lot this week. Kendall Hinton is a nice sneaky play.
Absolutely. And he could easily outperform even if you have him at 47. They're trailing enough, and he's going to be on the field. And, the nice thing when you're bringing up the setup for him, well, he was taking over for a while for Jerry Jeudy, who hadn't been around, and now Sutton's out. Now, last week they both were there, but certainly we saw the targets for Hinton. He had a 5 out of 3, which weren't great, but then he had a 9 in there, and that was impressive. His yardage has been between 35 and 62, so he gets something done. The matchup isn't necessarily easy. Per PFF, the coverage grade for the cornerbacks, they're number 11, KC, is against receivers. So Hinton will have to physically beat someone, and that's something that we have a little bit of concern about, the talent level that may not quite be there. But like you said, at some point, if this game gets away, then Kansas City's going to naturally back off a bit, and Hinton could clean up in the second half of that game.
Correct.
I think that's a phenomenal call.
Love it. That's what I'm hoping happens. It got him in some DFS lineups as well.
And I'm going to look at Greg Dortch's mind. It looks like Rondale Moore's not going. He hasn't practiced yet, so it seems super unlikely. Dortch apparently broke his thumb a couple weeks ago, but he's been a full participant in practice. And he's had 4 games this year that he had to sub in. So those 4 games, he had 55 snaps, 7 for 63 on 9 targets, 4 for 55 and a touchdown, 9 for 80, and 9 for $103. Every game he's played, he has been a strong fantasy option. And think about it, they're playing the Patriots. Well, what is Bill Belichick going to do? Not worried about James Conner, probably a little bit worried about DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown, certainly not worried about Greg Dortch. So my guess is the game plan is going to be do what we can to the two outside receivers, even if that means double both of them, which is in the realm. They could do that. And Dortch is going to be running in the middle of the field. Chemistry with his quarterback is not an issue because we've seen them connect very well. So for me, it's an easy spot for Greg Dortch.
Yeah, you could definitely get some pretty easy routes in there, some extra targets as well. I like the call. Let me see where I have him in my rankings. So Dortch comes in. Looks like I have him at 62, but that's not finalized. I was waiting on Rondale Moore, so he'll probably sneak into the top 50 for me. I'm not sure I'll get quite to 40, but I like the aggressiveness, Jim. Love it. Let's get some start-sit questions in here. First one comes from Valentino. I think this is in relation to the full-time site. Why do you have Elijah Moore ranked higher than Corey Davis? Who should I start in half PPR between them and Isaiah McKenzie? I think you're looking at those are Jody's rankings. My rankings, I actually have Corey Davis about 5 spots higher than Elijah Moore. I'll post those rankings inside the chat right now onto YouTube, so you can go ahead and access those. And I have Corey Davis and Isaiah McKenzie back-to-back in rankings. As of right now, I have them. Let me see exactly where McKenzie's at. McKenzie is at 44, and Corey Davis is at 43. So flip a coin, but Corey Davis is a slight lean for me. How about you, Jim?
You know, let me look at my rankings right now as I'm trying to navigate. I lost my mouse, so I'm using this stupid trackpad. Well, the one thing I'm worried about Corey Davis, like I said, is just that I don't think he's going to be clicking as much with the new quarterback, Mike White. I don't think, whereas Elijah Moore, at least we saw 2 bad games, but he had the one connection over the middle. Now, that was a broken play kind of. But more in the slot, I think is going to be more beneficial potentially here. Just basically in this game, he may need to use the slot because Buffalo's going to bring heat. Von Miller's out, but even with the 4-man rush they have, it's still a good rush. It's the most heat that White's going to have seen since he's there. Getting to the outside may not be favorable. But again, Elijah Moore, how many snaps is he going to play? It's like you said, it's a tough call. And you said McKenzie, you were about him as a part of the question, right? Well, yep. McKenzie, he's so game to game. And they try to find games where they have a defense where his speed creates a disadvantage for the defense. I don't think that's here. So again, like you said, coin flip on those two. I'd probably more inclined to play McKenzie because his snap share is more likely to be higher.
Okay. Like the call. Sorry we're not of help to you. We have a split difference of opinions here. You get to be the deciding factor today, Valentino. Next question we have is from Josh Durham. Hey, Billy and Jim, I have a tough decision. I need a ceiling game, assuming Amari is out. Choosing 2, tight end premium, Dulcich, Rashad White, or Zonovan Knight. Which way you leaning?
So looking at this one, Billy, you mentioned earlier, Dulcich, they're going to need him here.
I love Dulcich this week.
Yeah, I mean, and against Kansas City, like you said, the game is going to be one they're going to play from a negative game script. There are very few scenarios. I know this year's been weird. This doesn't seem like one of those weeks. Rashad White, this is a death matchup. Now, Leonard Fournette missed practice today, and it may not look good. But even as a receiver, the 49ers clamp down on receiving backs. Now, White could get volume. I think of the 3, if Fournette's out, White has the best path to volume. It gives him the most stable floor because other than last week and his second week, Dulcich's targets were like 2 to 5. So we have that. I still am with you, though. Dulcich is the play here because the defense will be favorable. The game script will be favorable. They'll have to have him. Whereas White, I just think is more of a floor play.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. If Fournette is out, I think that it's Rashad White and Dulcich for me. If we have Fournette in, I probably lean Zonovan Knight and Dulcich. For me, the clear one in is Dulcich because I think that we're going to see large volume this week. He was very successful last week. Like I said, there's no Cortland Sutton. They're going to need him to be involved this week as they play from behind as well. So for me, Dulcich is a lock in on these two, and then I'm waiting on the news between Fournette and then deciding between Knight and Rashad. Best of luck in your matchup this week. And looks like he says he was leaning with Knight and Dulcich. So great. There we go. Next question we have is from ETN Science and Many Things. Homer or Breida this week for a playoff run?
So, you know what? Breida just really has no upside. You could luck into a touchdown. They're playing Philly this week. Philly is going to beat them up on both sides of the ball. Leonard Williams is out on the other side. I know that's not the side we're talking about, but I really think that Philly is going to smack them around. Homer is likely having a volume role. So to me, fairly easy in my mind, because Homer should have a minimum of 10 touches here. He could flirt with 15, 18. Breida, you're hoping he gets 6 touches.
Yeah, I'm not even sure Breida would be the primary back if Saquon's out. They're probably going to use a mixture of backs.
Brightwell.
Yeah, Brightwell probably gets the goal line and short yardage. Breida comes in on passing downs and probably gets sprinkled in on 1 and 2. So I agree with you. I think that the volume here is pretty easily and clear going to be on the Homer side, and I like the matchup a little better as well too. So I'm going to go with Homer over Breida pretty easily as well with Jim. The next one we have, so from Jim to Jim, full PPR start. Dante needs 2 of these. Donta Foreman, DJ Moore, Tyler Boyd, Jerry Jeudy, DJ Chark. I think this one's pretty easy for me.
Yeah, Deontay Foreman for me because floor and ceiling, and he should be a close enough game. Any game he's gotten work, he's gotten at least 113 yards. Still don't trust DJ Moore. Can't do that. Jerry Jeudy is in a good spot. He's not 100%. That's my concern. I think Jerry Jeudy is your play. DJ Chark could come up big this week. DJ Chark had a snap share up to 73, I believe, and then 80-something last week. And we saw him actually get like 90 yards last week. He scored the week prior. Chark is in an interesting spot. And we talked earlier. We know Minnesota can't cover perimeter receivers. I think Jeudy is your smart play out of this, but I wouldn't be scared of using Chark. What do you think, Billy?
Oh man, we have a big difference here. I was going to say pretty clearly for me, DJ Moore and Jerry Jeudy. I liked what DJ Moore. I know DJ Moore hasn't been what we expected him to be this year, but Sam Darnold and him have a clear connection, in my opinion, dating back to last year and the first game together again this year. Even against Patrick Surtain in Week 12, he went 103 yards and a touchdown. So he was wide receiver number 11 that week. I think that we see that connection still here in Week 14. And so I think for me, it's pretty easily DJ Moore in at 1, and the other one is Jeudy, just because we need the number 1 receiver in this offense now with no Cortland Sutton. We just talked about that matchup. I'm not going to get into that again. And then I have a pretty common rule of thumb, and this was a rule of my draft partner, Dave Hubbard, and he's kind of beat this into my head to where I hear it now every time I get a start-sit question. It's like you hear it in the back of your head, and it's, I'll never start a part-time running back over a full-time receiver. And it breaks down to snaps, right? Although we like the matchup for Foreman and we think he has a path to success this week, he's still splitting the rock with 2 other running backs potentially. At least 1 at the minimum, possibly 2 with Blackshear as well. And so I think that for me, it breaks down to snap share. DJ Moore has the most snaps of all wide receivers in the NFL. He was actually, before Cooper Kupp's injury, he had more snaps than Cooper Kupp. He had more snaps than Justin Jefferson in terms of percent of snaps in each game. So love the involvement. It's a lot of cardio on his part. Now we're starting to see fantasy points. So I do expect that chemistry to continue for him and Sam Darnold, and that's why I lean DJ Moore.
Billy, one quick thing. When I was watching that game between DJ Moore and Surtain looked disinterested. He looked like he would be rather anywhere else than on the field that day. I don't know if they're pissed at Russell Wilson, but he did not look checked in that game at all. And when on that play against Moore, it was like he wasn't even going after him. He was in the picture. He was not aggressively guarding him. For whatever that's worth, right? I think that defense is in disarray. And nonetheless, they made the play. God bless them. It was great. I want to see Sam Darnold do it again. Certainly Moore will see some of Tariq Woolen when he's on his side of the field. Don't know how often he'll see that. But again, like your point, he's involved. He's had a number of good games. But we'll see what happens. I'm interested. I'm interested in seeing Sunday.
All right, we have a defensive question. New Orleans versus Atlanta, Ravens versus Brown, or Green Bay doesn't play the Rams. The Rams played last night. So are these the right matchups? I don't have the matchups.
Green Bay's off this week.
Yeah, the Rams already played last night. These aren't right, so we're going to skip this question.
Okay.
We have the next one, start Goff or Trevor Lawrence. I think
he has the Week 15 question. He wants to make a preemptive
Week 15. You're right.
He wants to make a preemptive move. That's smart. That's smart in the leagues that start those. So Atlanta's going with Ritter.
I was to say I'd probably gamble and go with New Orleans against the rookie if they go with Ritter. So I was leaning that way.
Done.
Done. Easy peasy. There you go. Next one we have is Goff or Trevor Lawrence. Again, we have to wait on the Trevor Lawrence news, but assuming both of them are in, which way are you going?
They both have really, really good matchups here. They both are facing what we call pass funnel defenses, teams you can't run on, but you can throw on. The offensive play calling and design in Detroit the last 2 weeks has been really good. Goff looks comfortable, and I think it helps that he's gotten Chark in there and healthy now, and obviously we already getting Amon-Ra doing his thing, and now with Swift as a receiver out of the back, we talked about that earlier, could be a big factor there. Lawrence's injury makes me a little nervous. And ultimately, I think there could be more explosive plays. Believe I'm going to say this out of Jared Goff. It's going to be more a function of his receivers. But the playmakers he has, they could make a lot out of a little against a bad defensive secondary.
Yeah, I have him back-to-back in rankings. Jared Goff at 12, Trevor Lawrence at 13. Again, though, I'm going to lean towards the healthier player, so I'm going to lean Goff in this situation because anytime there's a player playing with injury, there's always a chance of re-injury as well. Going into fantasy playoffs, or if you're in fantasy playoffs, you're going to need a full, complete game, so I probably lean with Goff here and play it safe. Next one we have is from Trey. Full PPR, start 2, Juju, Boyd, Singletary, Judy, or Rachaad White.
So I don't necessarily like Singletary in this matchup. Like we said, it was depth. I think it was 8 for 24 against the Jets. And the Jets are just nasty. And Deion Dawkins, the left tackle, he's still iffy. He missed last week. He's iffy. And he's actually one of their good linemen. They don't have a lot of them. But nonetheless, it's a depth match. We talked about Rachaad White earlier. Volume. If Fournette's out, you've got volume. Nightmare matchup. But even if that's the case, Rachaad White gets you 50 yards. I do like Juju this week. He had that concussion. He's had some limited snap share, and that should be to the point where we see that step up. And I actually think this week, we know the outside corners against from Denver. If they're interested this week, they're very good. But Juju's going to run a lot of in-breaking stuff. It's going to be passed off. It's not going to be him in hard man coverage. So overall, I think Juju has a chance here, but I'm going to defer to what you said earlier. Jerry Judy's the number one here. They're going to have to throw. He's going to have to get 8 to 10 targets. So I would go with Judy. And then honestly, second, for the floor, I'd go with White. But if I want to go for a little shot at higher, I think Juju could be your more ceiling play there.
I exactly agree with that. So Judy is the must start for me of this group. And then it broke down between White, Singletary, Juju. I think you could also, I'm going to just take exactly what Jim said because I agree with everything he said. If Fournette is in, your floor play now is Singletary over Rachaad White. And then if you need a ceiling play, it's Juju. Because Denver, although they are tough in the secondary, they have been beat inside the slot. 210 fantasy points on the year in the slot versus 106.8 out wide. And Juju makes his money in the slot. So that's the way we lean. Jim and I both in agreement there. Next question. I also have Dulcich if that makes any difference for Judy. Would you start Dulcich or Judy this week if you had to pick?
Well, again, I try to isolate these lineup decisions. I look at who the player I have to sit is. If you're basically saying, look, it's Dulcich or whoever he's against.
So same group we just used. Would you start Dulcich over any of those other guys?
Oh, let me take a look here.
So Juju, Boyd, Singletary, Rachaad White, and you could also throw in Dulcich in the mix.
I think Rachaad White's floor is a little better than Dulcich's floor. I think Juju's ceiling is definitely better than Dulcich's ceiling. Therefore, I would not change.
Yeah, and I don't think you really want two of the same pass catchers on this Russell Wilson offense. You're better off, going to his house and sitting in one of his toilets because he's got more toilets than he does touchdowns. Right? That was the stat we saw. more bathrooms than touchdowns on the season.
Hell, I have a small house and I might have more toilets than he has touchdowns.
Next one we have is half PPR pick one. Gabe Davis versus the Jets, Zay Jones versus Tennessee, or Chark versus Minnesota.
It's a really good question. Gabe Davis hasn't been getting it done. And so basically the Jets play sides with their corners. The Bills have a choice to make. If they want Diggs away from Sauce Gardner, they just line him up on DJ Reed's side of the field. And then that means Gabe Davis draws Gardner. But on the other hand, is Davis beating DJ Reed? Probably not. And Josh Allen really isn't gunslinging these days. Whatever's up with his elbow, he's not gunslinging. So I think that's what's limiting Gabe Davis. So I don't like him here. Now, Zay Jones, it's a great matchup. We don't know. You go back to the health of Trevor Lawrence. We're not sure there. I think Zay Jones has a target floor of 6 or 7 here with a ceiling of 10. He's getting that most weeks. And you can't run on Tennessee. So he's going to get targets. So PPR floor, half PPR, he gets you a floor. I think Chark has some ceiling here. Again, he had 215 and a touchdown on Thanksgiving, working his way in. But then he came back last week, like 598, I believe. It was a strong game. They're going to keep going his way. And again, we said Minnesota, pass funnel defense. Can't run on them, but they're going to throw. And St. Brown's going to get some attention in the middle. So I think Chark's your upside play, and I think Jones has a decent floor. What do you think?
Man, it's tough. I have them all kind of in that same tier. Although Chark to me is in a tier down below these two. Zay and Gabe are in the same tier for me. Although I love Chark at the beginning of the year. Having another receiver in the mix is not good for Chark. It's definitely good for the offense, and he's not playing full snaps yet. He's still not going to play full snaps this week, but just having another receiver in the mix is going to eat into at least some of the pie for Chark. Love the matchup, but I probably lean Gabe here just because it's the offense. I want a piece of the better offense. We just talked about Trevor Lawrence's health. As soon as you sit Gabe Davis, he's going to have 2 touchdowns and 150 yards. I feel like that's what's going to happen if I sit him, so I'm not going to sit him. I'm going to continue to play him and then just hope for that spike week, especially if you need a floor, I probably play Zay Jones. If you are playing for the win, I'm probably going Gabe Davis. So that's the way I'm going to play this. Jim says that he's biased because of Jim, so he's going to go with Jim's choice here for Dante Foreman over DJ. And then the last one we have is not a question, but just one to say he has no start-sit questions because of buys and injuries, and luckily he's locked in the top 2 seeds, largely in part because of me. Keep it for ground. So love to hear it, guys. Well, that is it, everybody. Unless you have a final start sit, throw it in there. And if we don't answer it now, we can answer it on Discord. Jim, why don't you tell everyone where to find you, what you're working on, and what you're doing?
You can find me the best place is Twitter, at Jim Coventry NFL. I do threads every week. I'll do a tight end trend one day, wide receiver, running back trends, do those. RotoWire, YouTube do 5 streams a week. I do a start-sit stream. And my deal with that, I don't tell you who to start. I tell you the why. I'll give you the breakdown for each player, and I'll give you my lean, but I arm you up to be able to make a decision. So that live stream is 2 hours for kickoff, RotoWire YouTube. You can catch me on Sirius XM channel 87, Saturdays 1 to 3, Sundays 9 to 10 a.m., obviously, and I'm on RotoWire.com.
Awesome, Jim. Well, always a pleasure to talk football with you. Love your mindset and your analytics and analysis, I should say. Always a pleasure to have you on, everybody. I'll be back tomorrow night at midnight Eastern. That's Midnight Madness with Muzio, doing our start-sit question pod, as well as recouping all of the final injury designations heading into the Sunday slate, and also live Shefty Bombs on the podcast. So we'll see you all then. Take care. See you tomorrow night, everybody.